They found the empty shackles at dawn, still warm from the body that had worn them through the night. I was 12 years old the first time I heard the name Cyrus, spoken with something other than pity or contempt. It was whispered in the darkness of our cabin like a prayer, like a promise, like the name of a God who had finally decided to pay attention to our suffering. Cyrus had done what we all dreamed of, but none of us dared attempt. He had run and he had made it. My name is Eli, and this is the story of how I learned that freedom is not a place you run to, but a thing you fight for, again and again, until either you win or you die trying. The Drummond plantation sprawled across 3,000 acres of Tennessee hill country, centered around an iron forge that burned day and night, turning ore into tools and chains and weapons for the Confederacy that would soon tear this nation apart. The year was 1855, and the air tasted of smoke and blood and the particular desperation that comes from knowing you are living in the last days of something terrible that refuses to die. Master James Drummond owned 43 souls, though he called us hands as if we were nothing more than extensions of his will, tools to be used and discarded when they broke. His plantation was different from the cotton and tobacco farms that dominated the Deep South. Here, we worked the forge and the mines, extracting iron ore from the red earth and transforming it in fires hot enough to melt stone. It was brutal work that killed men slowly through exhaustion and quickly through accident. I had seen 3 men die in my short life, one crushed by falling rock in the mine, one burned when molten iron splashed across his chest, one simply worked until his heart gave out and he collapsed face first into the dirt. I was born on this plantation, in a cabin that housed 6 families, in a space meant for one. My mother had died bringing me into this world, and my father had been sold away before I could form memories of his face. I was raised by the community, passed from lap to lap, fed by women who had milk to spare, taught by men who remembered what it meant to be human even in a place designed to strip away our humanity. Cyrus had been one of those men. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with hands scarred from years of forge work and eyes that seemed to see through the present moment into some future only he could perceive. He had been brought to Drummond's plantation 5 years before I was born, sold down from Virginia after his previous master died, and the estate was liquidated. He left behind a wife named Ruth and 2 younger brothers, Marcus and Samuel, all sold to different buyers, scattered like seeds on the wind. For 15 years, Cyrus worked the forge. He became the best iron worker Drummond had, capable of shaping metal with a precision that bordered on artistry. Drummond valued him highly, which meant Cyrus was beaten less frequently than the rest of us and given slightly larger rations. It also meant Drummond watched him more carefully, knowing that a valuable slave was also a valuable loss if he ran. But Cyrus was patient. He watched, and he waited, and he learned. He learned the patrol routes of the slave catchers who rode the roads at night. He learned which dogs were used for tracking and how to confuse their sense of smell. He learned the geography of Tennessee, the rivers and mountains and hidden paths that could carry a man north toward freedom. He learned all of this while never giving any sign that he was planning to use it. And then, one night in October of 1854, he simply disappeared. The alarm went up at dawn when the overseer, a vicious man named Pritchard, discovered Cyrus's empty shackles in the slave quarters. Drummond went into a rage, screaming about the money he had lost, about the ingratitude of slaves, about the need to make an example. He sent riders in every direction, hired professional slave catchers with their vicious dogs, offered a reward of $500 for Cyrus's return, dead or alive. But Cyrus was gone, vanished like smoke, and despite weeks of searching, no trace of him was ever found. We mourned him in secret, believing he had likely died in the attempt. The odds of a slave successfully reaching the north were slim. Most were caught within days, returned to their masters for brutal punishment that served as a warning to others. Those who evaded immediate capture often died of exposure or starvation in the wilderness. The few who made it to free states still had to worry about slave catchers who operated with impunity across state lines, kidnapping free blacks and dragging them back into bondage. So when we whispered Cyrus's name in the darkness, it was with the assumption that we were speaking of the dead, honoring a man who had chosen death over slavery. We were wrong. It was a cold November night, nearly a year after Cyrus's escape, when he returned. I was sleeping in the cabin I shared with 15 others when I was awakened by a hand over my mouth and a familiar voice whispering in my ear, "Quiet, boy. It's me." I opened my eyes to see Cyrus crouched beside my pallet, looking leaner and harder than I remembered, dressed in clothes I had never seen before, good wool pants, a heavy coat, boots that actually fit. He looked like a different person, like someone who had shed the skin of slavery and emerged as something new. "Cyrus," I whispered when he removed his hand from my mouth. "You're alive? You made it?" "I made it," he confirmed, his voice barely audible. "All the way to Canada. I'm a free man, Eli, free." The words sounded strange in his mouth, like a language he was still learning to speak. "Then why did you come back?" I asked, unable to comprehend why anyone would return to this hell after escaping it. His face hardened. "Because my wife is still here. Ruth. Drummond bought her 6 months ago from a plantation in Mississippi. I didn't know until I was already gone, but when I found out, I knew I had to come back for her." I stared at him in disbelief. Ruth had indeed arrived at our plantation earlier that year, a quiet woman in her 30s who kept to herself and spoke little of her past. I had not known she was Cyrus's wife. I had not known that Cyrus even had a wife. "You're going to take her?" I asked. "Tonight," he said. "I need you to do something for me, Eli. I need you to go to the women's cabin and tell Ruth to be ready. Tell her Cyrus has come for her. Can you do that?" I nodded, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was dangerous. If we were caught, we would both be killed. But the chance to be part of something like this, to help someone escape, was intoxicating. I crept out of my cabin and across the yard to the women's quarters. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds, and the only sound was the distant barking of dogs and the ever-present rumble of the forge. I slipped inside and found Ruth sleeping near the door. I shook her gently awake and whispered Cyrus's message. Her eyes went wide with shock and disbelief, then filled with tears. "He came back," she whispered. "He came back for me." "You have to be ready to go," I said urgently. "He's waiting." She nodded and quickly gathered her few possessions, a change of clothes, a small wooden cross, nothing more. We crept back outside together, and I led her to where Cyrus waited in the shadows near the tree line. The reunion between them was silent but profound. They embraced without words, and I could see Ruth's shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Cyrus held her tightly, his face pressed against her hair, and for a moment they were not slaves or fugitives, but simply a husband and wife, reunited after years of forced separation. "Thank you, Eli," Cyrus said, turning to me. "You're a brave boy. You're going to be a brave man." "Take me with you," I blurted out, surprising myself. "Please, I want to be free too." Cyrus shook his head gently. "Not yet. You're too young and the journey is too dangerous, but I promise you this. I will come back, not just for you, but for all of you. This is not the last time you'll see me." "You're coming back again?" I asked, incredulous. "As many times as it takes," he said, "until everyone I care about is free. That's my promise to you, Eli. Remember it." And then they were gone, melting into the darkness like ghosts, leaving me standing alone in the cold November night, with my heart racing and my mind reeling with the impossibility of what I had just witnessed. The alarm went up at dawn when Ruth's absence was discovered. Drummond's rage was even greater than it had been when Cyrus first escaped. 2 slaves gone, both valuable, both vanished without a trace. He had Pritchard whip 3 women from Ruth's cabin, demanding to know who had helped her escape. They knew nothing or claimed to know nothing, and eventually Drummond gave up, though the fury never left his eyes. I said nothing. I kept my head down and my mouth shut, but inside I was burning with a secret knowledge that felt like power. Cyrus had made it. Cyrus was free. And Cyrus was coming back. The other slaves began to whisper about it in the days that followed. How had Ruth escaped? Who had helped her? Some suspected outside abolitionists. Others thought she had simply gotten lucky. But a few, the older ones, the ones who remembered Cyrus, began to wonder if perhaps the impossible had happened. What if he came back for her, Old Thomas whispered one night in our cabin. What if Cyrus made it north and then came back? That's crazy, another man said. No one comes back. You get free. You stay free. You don't risk your neck coming back to this hell. But I knew the truth. And I knew that Cyrus would return, just as he had promised. I was right. 6 months later, in the spring of 1856, Cyrus returned again. This time he came for his brothers, Marcus and Samuel, who had been purchased by Drummond the previous winter. I was the one who spotted him first, a shadow moving through the darkness near the forge. I approached carefully, and when he saw me, he smiled. I told you I'd come back, he said. This time I was ready. I had been watching and learning, paying attention to the patrol routes and the guard schedules, preparing for the moment when Cyrus would return, and I could help him. Together, we freed Marcus and Samuel, and I watched them disappear into the night. 3 brothers reunited and heading toward freedom. And that was when I understood what Cyrus was doing. He was not just rescuing his family, he was building a legend. He was showing us that escape was possible, that the masters were not all powerful, that we had an ally who would risk everything to bring us home. Cyrus was becoming our Moses, leading his people out of bondage one soul at a time. And I was becoming his disciple, learning from him, preparing for the day when I too would make the journey north. But I was also becoming something else. Cyrus's eyes and ears on the plantation, his connection to those who remained behind, his partner in a campaign of liberation that would transform both of us and everyone we touched. The legend of Cyrus was just beginning, and I was going to be part of it. The seasons turned, and with each turning the plantation changed. What had once been a place of resigned despair became something different, a place haunted by possibility, by the ghost of a man who refused to stay gone, by the growing belief that freedom was not just a dream, but an achievable reality. I was 13 when I truly understood what Cyrus was doing, and why it mattered more than any single escape ever could. It was late summer of 1856, 8 months after Cyrus had taken his brothers north. The plantation was in the midst of harvest season, which for us meant longer hours in the forge and the mines, producing the iron that would be sold to fund Drummond's increasingly extravagant lifestyle. The work was killing us slowly and sometimes not so slowly. 2 men had died that summer, one from heat stroke while working the forge in the brutal Tennessee heat, another from a mining accident that left him crushed beneath a ton of fallen rock. Drummond barely noticed. To him, we were replaceable, just another expense in his ledger books. When a slave died, he simply purchased another to take their place. The system was designed to be sustainable through our suffering and death. But something had shifted in the quarters. Where once there had been only exhaustion and hopelessness, now there was whispered speculation. When would Cyrus return? Who would he take next? The questions were asked with a mixture of hope and fear, because everyone knew that Cyrus's continued success was making Drummond increasingly paranoid and violent. After Marcus and Samuel's escape, Drummond had hired additional overseers and brought in professional slave catchers to patrol the plantation at night. He had purchased more dogs, vicious bloodhounds trained to track human scent. He had installed new locks on the slave quarters and required twice daily roll calls to ensure no one was missing. The plantation had become a prison, and we were all suspects in a crime that had not yet been committed. Pritchard, the head overseer, took particular pleasure in the new security measures. He was a cruel man who had always enjoyed inflicting pain, and now he had Drummond's explicit permission to be as brutal as necessary to prevent further escapes. He carried a whip that he used liberally, and his favorite punishment was to make examples of those he suspected of disloyalty. I learned to be invisible. I kept my head down, worked hard, and gave no indication that I knew anything about Cyrus or his plans. But inside, I was watching everything, learning everything, preparing for the moment when Cyrus would return and I could help him again. That moment came in September, during the new moon when the darkness was absolute and the patrols were at their most vigilant. I was awakened by a soft tapping on the cabin wall, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. It was the signal Cyrus had taught me during his last visit. I slipped out of my pallet carefully, stepping over the sleeping bodies of the other men, and made my way to the door. Cyrus was waiting in the shadows, but he was not alone. With him was a white man, middle-aged and serious-looking, dressed in plain clothes that marked him as a Quaker. "Eli," Cyrus said quietly, "this is Thaddeus. He's a friend, part of the Underground Railroad. He's going to help us." I stared at the white man with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. I had heard of abolitionists, white people who opposed slavery, but I had never met one. The idea that a white man would risk his life to help slaves escape was almost as unbelievable as Cyrus's repeated returns. "We need information," Cyrus continued. "How many guards are on patrol tonight? Where are the dogs kept? Has anything changed since my last visit?" I told him everything I had observed over the past months, the patrol schedules, the location of the dog kennels, the new locks on the quarters, Pritchard's habit of making random inspections in the middle of the night. Cyrus listened intently, asking clarifying questions, building a mental map of the plantation's security. "We're not taking anyone tonight," he said finally. "This is reconnaissance, but soon, maybe next month, maybe the month after, we're going to do something big. We're going to take a group, maybe 10 or 15 people, all at once. And when we do, I'm going to need your help coordinating from inside." "I'll do whatever you need," I said immediately. Cyrus studied me for a long moment. "You've grown, Eli. You're not a boy anymore. You're becoming a man. But what we're planning is dangerous. If you're caught helping us, Drummond will kill you, slowly, publicly, as a warning to others. Do you understand that?" "I understand," I said, "but I'd rather die trying to be free than live my whole life in chains." Cyrus smiled, and there was pride in his expression. "You remind me of myself at your age. Angry and brave and maybe a little bit crazy. Those are good qualities for what we're about to do." Over the next hour, Cyrus explained his plan. He had been working with the Underground Railroad, the network of abolitionists and free blacks who helped slaves escape to the north. They had established safe houses along a route from Tennessee to Canada, places where fugitives could hide and rest during their journey. But the route was dangerous, and moving large groups was exponentially more risky than moving individuals. "The key is coordination," Cyrus explained. "Everyone has to move at the same time, following the same route, with guides waiting at each stop. If even one person gets caught, the whole operation falls apart. That's why I need someone inside the plantation who can organize people, get them ready, make sure they understand the plan, and can follow it exactly." "That's me," I said. "I can do that." "I know you can," Cyrus said, "but it's going to take time. We need to identify who's ready to run, who has the physical strength and mental toughness to make the journey. We need to prepare them without alerting the overseers. And we need to wait for the right moment, a night when the conditions are perfect for escape." Thaddeus spoke for the first time, his voice soft but firm. "The Lord has called us to this work, young man. We are instruments of his justice, breaking the chains of the oppressed. But we must be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Patience and planning will save more lives than reckless courage." I nodded, though I barely understood his biblical references. What I did understand was that I was being entrusted with something important, something that could change the lives of everyone on this plantation. After Cyrus and Thaddeus left, I lay awake for hours, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. I was 13 years old, and I had just agreed to become part of a conspiracy that could get me killed. But I felt more alive than I had ever felt before, because for the first time in my life, I was not just surviving. I was fighting back. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, and it had nothing to do with Cyrus or escape plans. It had to do with a girl named Sarah. Sarah was 14, the daughter of a woman named Hannah, who worked in Drummond's house. Sarah was beautiful and gentle, with a voice like honey when she sang the spirituals that kept our souls alive in that place of death. I had loved her from afar for as long as I could remember, though I had never had the courage to tell her. Pritchard noticed her too. It started with lingering looks, then inappropriate comments, then accidental touches when he passed her in the yard. Hannah tried to protect her daughter, keeping her close, never letting her be alone. But Pritchard was patient and persistent, and he had all the power. One afternoon, while most of us were working in the forge, Pritchard cornered Sarah in the barn. I was returning from the well with water when I heard her scream. Without thinking, I dropped the bucket and ran toward the sound. I found Pritchard with his hand over Sarah's mouth, pushing her against the barn wall, his other hand tearing at her dress. She was fighting him, but he was twice her size and infinitely stronger. Something broke inside me. All the rage I had been carrying my entire life, rage at my mother's death, at my father's sale, at the endless brutality and humiliation and suffering, erupted in that moment. I grabbed a shovel that was leaning against the barn wall and swung it with all my strength at Pritchard's head. The impact made a sound like a melon splitting. Pritchard went down hard, blood streaming from a gash above his ear. He wasn't dead, I could see him breathing, but he was unconscious. Sarah stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Eli, what have you done?" What had I done? I had struck an overseer, a white man. The penalty for that was death, and not a quick death. Drummond would make an example of me, would torture me publicly to show what happened to slaves who dared to raise their hands against their betters. "Run," I told Sarah. "Go back to the quarters. Tell them you don't know who did this. Say you ran away before you could see." "But you—" "Go," I shouted, and she ran. I stood there for a moment, looking down at Pritchard's unconscious form, the bloody shovel in my hands, and I knew my life on this plantation was over. I had two choices: wait for Pritchard to wake up and identify me, which would lead to my execution, or run. I chose to run. I dropped the shovel and sprinted for the tree line, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard shouts as someone discovered Pritchard's body. The alarm would go up within minutes. The dogs would be released. The slave catchers would ride out. I had maybe an hour's head start, maybe less. I ran through the woods, following paths I had memorized from Cyrus's descriptions, heading north toward the first safe house on the Underground Railroad route. I had no supplies, no plan, no idea if I would survive the night. All I knew was that I could not go back, that I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled with exhaustion. I ran until I could no longer hear the dogs behind me. I ran until I collapsed in a hollow beneath a fallen tree, shaking with fear and adrenaline and the terrible knowledge that I had just thrown away any chance of a coordinated escape with Cyrus. I had acted impulsively, emotionally, stupidly. I had endangered not just myself but everyone who was counting on me. Cyrus had trusted me to be patient, to wait for the right moment, and I had failed him. As I lay there in the darkness, listening for the sounds of pursuit, I thought about Sarah and whether she had made it back safely. I thought about Hannah and how she would feel knowing her daughter had been attacked. I thought about all the people still on the plantation who were waiting for Cyrus to return and lead them to freedom. And I thought about Pritchard and whether I had killed him and whether I cared if I had. The answer to that last question was complicated. I did not want to be a killer, but I also did not regret stopping him from raping Sarah. If that made me a murderer, then so be it. Some things were worth killing for, and protecting the innocent was one of them. I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion because I woke to find dawn breaking through the trees and a hand on my shoulder. I jerked awake, ready to fight or flee, and found myself staring into Cyrus's face. "Easy, boy," he said quietly. "It's me. You're safe." "How did you find me?" I gasped. "I have people watching the plantation. They sent word that you had run and I came looking for you. You did well, Eli. You followed the route I taught you. You made it almost 10 miles before you stopped." "I ruined everything," I said miserably. "I was supposed to help you coordinate the big escape, and instead You saved a girl from being raped," Cyrus interrupted. "You stood up to an overseer who was abusing his power. You did what was right, even though you knew it would cost you everything. That's not ruin, Eli. That's courage." "But the plan—" "Plans change," Cyrus said. "We adapt. That's how we survive. Now come on. We need to get you to the first safe house before the slave catchers expand their search radius." He helped me to my feet, and we began walking north, moving quickly but carefully through the Tennessee wilderness. As we walked, Cyrus told me about the journey ahead, the safe houses, the guides, the rivers we would cross, the mountains we would climb. He told me about Canada, about what it felt like to be truly free, about the life I could build once I made it north. But he also told me something else, something that changed everything. "I'm not done, Eli," he said. "I'm going back, again and again, until everyone who wants to be free has the chance to escape, and I want you to help me. Not from inside the plantation, that's too dangerous now, but from the outside. I want to train you, teach you everything I know about moving through hostile territory, about evading capture, about bringing people home. I want you to become what I am, a conductor on the Underground Railroad, a hunter of freedom." I looked at him, this man who had become my hero, my teacher, my salvation. "I'll do it," I said. "Whatever you need, I'll do it." "Good," Cyrus said, "because we're just getting started. Drummond thinks he's seen the last of us, but he's wrong. We're coming back, and we're bringing an army." As we walked through the forest toward freedom, I felt the fear begin to fade, replaced by something else, purpose. I had spent my entire life as a victim, powerless and afraid, but now I was becoming something different. I was becoming a fighter, a liberator, a man who would risk everything to bring others home. The breaking point had come and passed. The boy named Eli was dying, and in his place a man was being born, a man who would hunt slavers the way they had hunted us, a man who would never stop until the chains were broken and the captives were free. The safe house was a small cabin hidden deep in the Tennessee mountains, so remote that even the slave catchers rarely ventured near it. It belonged to a free black family named the Washingtons, husband, wife, and 3 grown children, who had purchased their freedom years ago and now dedicated their lives to helping others achieve the same. I spent 3 weeks there, recovering from my flight and learning the skills I would need to survive as a fugitive and eventually as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Cyrus was my teacher, and he was merciless in his instruction. "You think running away is the hard part, he told me on my first full day at the safe house. It's not. Running is easy, staying free is hard. Staying alive while you help others get free is harder still. If you're going to do this work, you need to be smarter, faster, and more disciplined than anyone hunting you." He taught me how to move through the wilderness without leaving tracks, how to use streams to break my scent trail, how to navigate by the stars when the North Star was hidden by clouds. He taught me which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to start a fire without smoke, how to find water in seemingly dry terrain. But more than survival skills, he taught me about the network that made escape possible, the Underground Railroad. "It's not actually underground, and it's not actually a railroad," he explained one evening as we sat by the fire. "It's a network of people, black and white, free and enslaved, who work together to move fugitives from the South to free states and Canada. We use railroad terminology as code. Safe houses are stations. The people who run them are station masters. Those of us who guide fugitives are conductors. The fugitives themselves are passengers or cargo." "How many people are part of it?" I asked. "Thousands," Cyrus said. "Maybe tens of thousands. Most of them will never meet each other. They know only their piece of the network, the station before theirs and the station after. That way, if someone is captured and tortured, they can't betray the whole system." "Have you ever been caught?" I asked. Cyrus's face darkened. "Once, about 6 months after I first escaped. I was bringing a family north, a mother and 3 children. We were betrayed by someone we thought was a friend. The slave catchers ambushed us at a station in Kentucky. What happened? The mother and children were captured. I escaped barely. I heard later that they were returned to their master and sold separately as punishment. The youngest child was only 5 years old. His voice was flat, emotionless, but I could see the pain in his eyes. That's when I learned that this work requires more than courage. It requires perfect planning, absolute discipline, and the willingness to accept that sometimes, despite your best efforts, people will be captured and returned to slavery. "Do you ever think about quitting?" I asked quietly. "Every day," he admitted. "Every single day I think about staying in Canada, building a life, forgetting about the South and everyone still trapped here. But then I remember Ruth and Marcus and Samuel and all the others I've helped escape. I remember that every person I bring north is a victory against the system that tried to destroy us. And I know I can't quit, not while there are still people who need help." He looked at me intently. "That's what you need to understand, Eli. This work will consume your life. It will be dangerous and exhausting and heartbreaking. You will lose people. You will fail sometimes. And you will never be able to stop, because there will always be more people who need saving. So before you commit to this, you need to be sure. Are you willing to give up everything, safety, comfort, the chance at a normal life, to do this work? I thought about Sarah, about whether Pritchard had survived my attack, about all the people still suffering on Drummond's plantation. I thought about my mother, who had died giving birth to me in chains. I thought about my father, sold away to some unknown fate. I thought about every injustice I had witnessed, every cruelty, every moment of degradation and despair. "I'm sure," I said. "I want to do this." Cyrus nodded slowly. "Then we begin your real training tomorrow." The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. Cyrus pushed me relentlessly, testing my physical endurance and mental toughness. He would wake me in the middle of the night and make me navigate through the forest in complete darkness. He would hide and make me track him using only subtle signs: a broken twig, a disturbed patch of leaves, a faint footprint in soft earth. He taught me to fight with my hands, with knives, with improvised weapons, always emphasizing that violence was a last resort, but that I needed to be capable of it if necessary. "The slave catchers are brutal men," he said during one training session. "They will not hesitate to kill you if they catch you. You need to be willing to do the same to them or you won't survive." But the most important training was not physical, it was psychological. Cyrus taught me how to manage fear, how to stay calm under pressure, how to make quick decisions in life or death situations. He taught me how to read people, how to identify who could be trusted and who might betray us. He taught me the elaborate codes and signals used by the Underground Railroad to communicate safely, and he taught me about the plantation we would be targeting, Drummond's. "We're going back," he told me in December of 1856, as the first snows began to fall in the mountains. "Not just to rescue 1 or 2 people, but to take a large group, maybe 20 or more. It will be the biggest operation I've ever attempted and the most dangerous." "Why Drummond's?" I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. "Because you know it," Cyrus said. "You know the layout, the routines, the weak points in their security, and because the people there are ready. They've seen me come and go 3 times now. They believe escape is possible. They're just waiting for someone to lead them." "When?" I asked. "Spring," he said. "March or April, when the weather is mild enough for travel, but before the summer patrols intensify. We'll need that time to prepare, to coordinate with the stations along the route, to make sure everything is in place. Over the next months, we planned meticulously." Cyrus had contacts throughout the Underground Railroad network, and he used them to prepare a route that would take us from Tennessee through Kentucky and Ohio to Canada. Each station was alerted that a large group would be coming through. Extra supplies were stockpiled. Additional guides were recruited to help move so many people safely. We also gathered intelligence about Drummond's plantation. Cyrus had informants, free blacks who could move relatively freely, and who would visit the plantation under various pretexts, observing and reporting back. Through them, we learned that Pritchard had survived my attack, but had been left partially blind in one eye. We learned that Drummond had increased security even further, hiring more overseers and installing a new system of nightly patrols. We learned that the slaves were more closely watched than ever, with severe punishments for even minor infractions. But we also learned something encouraging. The legend of Cyrus had grown. The slaves on Drummond's plantation spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. Some believed he had supernatural powers, that he could become invisible or transform into an animal. Others saw him as a Moses figure, sent by God to lead them out of bondage. The mythology that had grown around him was, in some ways, more powerful than the man himself. "We can use that," Cyrus said when I told him about the rumors. "Fear and faith are powerful motivators. If they believe I'm more than human, they'll follow me even when the situation seems hopeless." In March of 1857, we finalized our plan. We would infiltrate the plantation on the night of the new moon, when darkness would provide maximum cover. We would move in 2 teams, Cyrus leading one, me leading the other. Each team would be responsible for gathering half the group and guiding them to a rendezvous point in the forest. From there, we would move as one large group to the first station, about 15 miles north. The people we would be taking had been carefully selected based on intelligence from our informants. They were all physically capable of making the journey, mentally prepared for the risks, and absolutely committed to escape. Among them was Sarah and her mother Hannah, the woman whose daughter I had saved from Pritchard. "Are you ready for this?" Cyrus asked me the night before we were set to leave for Tennessee. I thought about everything I had learned, everything I had become over the past 6 months. I was 14 years old, but I felt ancient, hardened by training and purpose. I was no longer the frightened boy who had run from Drummond's plantation. I was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, a hunter of freedom, a man with a mission. "I'm ready," I said. We left the safe house before dawn, traveling south through the mountains toward Tennessee. With us were 3 other conductors, experienced men who had made this journey dozens of times. We moved carefully, avoiding roads and towns, sleeping during the day and traveling at night. It took us 5 days to reach the forest near Drummond's plantation. We established a camp about 2 miles from the property line, hidden in a dense thicket where we could observe without being seen. For 2 more days we watched the plantation, noting patrol patterns, counting guards, looking for any changes in security that our informants might have missed. Everything looked as expected. The plantation was locked down tight, but we had anticipated that. Our plan accounted for the increased security. On the night of the operation, we painted our faces with mud to darken our skin and reduce visibility. We dressed in dark clothes and moved with weapons, knives primarily, though Cyrus carried a pistol he had acquired in Canada. We were not looking for a fight, but we were prepared for one if necessary. "Remember the plan," Cyrus said as we prepared to move out. "Quick and quiet. Get your people to the rendezvous point. If something goes wrong, if you're discovered, abort and scatter. Better to lose the operation than to lose lives. Understood?" We all nodded. "Then let's go bring our people home." We moved through the darkness like ghosts, crossing the plantation boundary and making our way toward the slave quarters. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it, but my hands were steady and my mind was clear. This was what I had trained for. This was my purpose. I reached the quarters and gave the signal, a soft whistle that sounded like a night bird. Within moments, figures began emerging from the cabins, 10 people all moving silently, all following my lead. I saw Sarah among them, her eyes wide with fear and hope. I gave her a reassuring nod, and she fell in line behind me. We were halfway to the tree line when the dog started barking. Someone had seen us. The alarm was going up. Shouts echoed across the plantation as guards scrambled to respond. Lanterns began to appear, bobbing through the darkness as men ran toward the quarters. "Run!" I hissed, and we ran. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, I could hear the dogs getting closer, their barking frenzied now that they had a scent. I could hear men shouting, horses neighing, the whole plantation mobilizing to stop us. We reached the rendezvous point to find Cyrus already there with his group. His face was grim. "They knew we were coming," he said. "Someone betrayed us. We need to move now before they surround us." We ran through the forest, 20 fugitives and 4 conductors, with the slave catchers and their dogs closing in behind us. It was chaos, nothing like the careful, coordinated escape we had planned. People were stumbling, falling, crying out in fear. I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her along, refusing to let her fall behind. Gunshots rang out. Someone screamed. I didn't look back. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, until we reached a river that Cyrus had identified as a natural barrier. We plunged into the icy water, the current strong enough to sweep away our scent and confuse the dogs. On the far bank, we regrouped and counted heads. 18 people had made it. 2 were missing, an older man who had fallen behind and a young woman who had panicked and run in the wrong direction. Cyrus's face was like stone. "We keep moving. We can't go back for them. If we stop, we all die." And so we moved, through the night and into the dawn, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and Drummond's plantation. The slave catchers would be coming, and they would not give up easily. But we had 18 people who had been slaves and were now fugitives running toward freedom. And I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that liberation is not clean or easy, that people will be lost, that victory and tragedy are often inseparable. But we would keep running. We would keep fighting. We would keep hunting for freedom, no matter the cost. Because that was what it meant to be truly free. Not just escaping slavery yourself, but refusing to rest until everyone was free. The hunt had begun in earnest, and we would not stop until we won or died trying. We moved through the Tennessee wilderness like a wounded animal, fast but erratic, driven by desperation rather than strategy. Behind us, the slave catchers came with their dogs and their guns, and their absolute certainty that we would be caught, because fugitives always were. They were wrong. The first station was a farmhouse owned by a Quaker family named the Coffins, about 15 miles north of Drummond's plantation. We reached it just before dawn, 18 exhausted fugitives and 4 equally exhausted conductors. Mrs. Coffin took one look at our condition, muddy, bleeding, half frozen from our river crossing, and immediately began organizing. "Get them inside," she said briskly. "Into the cellar, quickly now before the sun rises." The cellar was actually a hidden room beneath the regular cellar, accessible only through a trapdoor concealed under a pile of stored vegetables. It was cramped and dark and smelled of earth, but it was safe. We crowded inside, and Mrs. Coffin brought us food and water and blankets. "The slave catchers will be here within hours," she said matter-of-factly. "They always check this farm. They know we're abolitionists, though they've never been able to prove we harbor fugitives. You must be absolutely silent. No talking, no moving, no sound at all. If they find you, we all hang." We huddled in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the household above us going about its normal morning routine. True to Mrs. Coffin's prediction, the slave catchers arrived around mid-morning. We could hear their horses, their voices demanding to search the property, Mr. Coffin's calm refusal, followed by their insistence that they had legal authority. The search lasted 2 hours. We heard boots stomping through the house, furniture being moved, the regular cellar door being opened, and heavy footsteps descending the stairs. Someone walked directly over our hidden room, so close I could have reached up and touched the floorboards above my head. Sarah was pressed against me in the cramped space, her body trembling with fear. I put my arm around her and held her close, feeling her heart racing against my chest. Around us, the others were equally terrified, some with tears streaming silently down their faces, others with their eyes closed in prayer. Finally, after an eternity, the slave catchers left, their voices fading as they rode away. But Mrs. Coffin made us wait another 2 hours before opening the trapdoor, just to be certain they were truly gone. "They'll be back," she said as we emerged, stiff and aching, into the regular cellar. "They always come back, sometimes 2 or 3 times. You'll need to stay hidden for at least 2 days before it's safe to move on." Those 2 days felt like 2 years. We remained in the hidden room, emerging only for brief periods to eat and relieve ourselves. The tension was unbearable. Every sound from outside made us freeze in terror. Every horse that passed on the road might be the slave catchers returning. But Cyrus used the time to plan our next moves. He had maps of the route north, provided by the Underground Railroad network, showing the location of every station between Tennessee and Canada. He gathered us together and explained what lay ahead. "We have about 500 miles to cover," he said, his voice low but firm. "It will take us at least 6 weeks, maybe longer. We'll move mostly at night, traveling between stations. Each station will hide us for a day or 2, then pass us on to the next. The route takes us through Kentucky, across the Ohio River into free territory, then through Ohio and into Canada." "What if we're caught?" asked a man named Joseph, who had worked in the forge with me. "If you're caught, you'll be returned to Drummond and punished severely," Cyrus said bluntly. "Probably whipped publicly, possibly sold away to a worse situation. Some of you might be killed as an example. That's the reality. But if we're careful, if we follow the plan and trust the network, we have a good chance of making it." "How many people have you brought north?" Sarah asked. "Before this group?" 11, Cyrus said. "All of them made it safely to Canada. I've never lost anyone once we got past the first station, but this is different. This is the largest group I've ever moved. It's more dangerous, but it's also more important. Every one of you who makes it to freedom is a victory against the system that tried to break us." On the 3rd day, after the Coffins were certain the slave catchers had moved their search elsewhere, we prepared to leave. Mrs. Coffin provided us with better clothes, worn but serviceable garments that would help us blend in if we were seen. She also gave us food for the journey and detailed instructions about the route to the next station. "May God go with you," she said as we prepared to leave, "and may you all find the freedom you deserve." We traveled at night, moving through forests and fields, avoiding roads and towns. Cyrus led the way, with me bringing up the rear to make sure no one fell behind. The other two conductors moved through the middle of the group, providing support and encouragement. It was exhausting work. Some of the fugitives were not in good physical condition. Years of hard labor and poor nutrition had left them weak. We had to move slowly to accommodate them, which meant covering less distance each night than Cyrus would have liked. But we moved steadily, and we moved together. The second station was a barn owned by a free black farmer named Washington, about 20 miles north of the Coffin farm. We arrived just before dawn and were hidden in a hayloft, where we slept through the day. Washington brought us food and news. The slave catchers were still searching, and there was a reward of $1,000 for information leading to our capture. $1,000, Joseph said with bitter amusement. That's more than Drummond paid for most of us. We must be valuable now that we're free. From Washington's farm, we moved to a station run by a German immigrant family who barely spoke English, but who fed us generously and treated us with kindness I had never experienced from white people before. Then to a station run by a black church, where the congregation prayed over us and sang spirituals that brought tears to our eyes. Then to a station run by a white widow, whose husband had been an abolitionist and who continued his work after his death. Each station brought us closer to the Ohio River, the boundary between slave states and free states, but each station also brought new dangers. The slave catchers were persistent, and the network of informants who supported them was extensive. We had several close calls, once hiding in a root cellar while slave catchers searched the house above us, once wading through a swamp to avoid a patrol on the road, once splitting into smaller groups to pass through a town where strangers would be noticed. Through it all, I watched Cyrus work with a mixture of admiration and growing understanding. He was not just a conductor, he was a leader, a strategist, a man who could inspire people to keep going even when they were exhausted and terrified. He knew when to push and when to rest, when to take risks and when to be cautious. He remembered every person's name, knew their strengths and weaknesses, and adapted his plans to accommodate them. And I learned from him. I learned how to read the land, how to sense danger before it arrived, how to keep people calm in moments of crisis. I learned that leadership was not about being the strongest or the bravest, but about being the most reliable, the one people could trust to make good decisions even under pressure. 6 weeks after leaving Drummond's plantation, we reached the Ohio River. It was late April, and the river was swollen with spring runoff, wide and fast and dangerous. But on the far side was free territory, Ohio, where slavery was illegal and where we would have at least some legal protection if we were caught. "This is the most dangerous crossing," Cyrus told us as we waited for darkness. "The river is watched by slave catchers on both sides. If we're spotted, they'll come after us. But once we're across, we're legally free. They can still kidnap us and drag us back south. It happens all the time. But we'll have rights we don't have here. We'll be able to fight back." We crossed in small boats provided by the station on the Kentucky side, making 3 trips to get everyone across. I was in the last boat with Cyrus, Sarah, and 3 others. Halfway across, we heard shouts from the Kentucky shore. Someone had spotted us. "Row!" Cyrus commanded, and we rowed with all our strength, the current fighting us, the far shore seeming impossibly distant. Gunshots rang out, bullets splashing into the water around us. One bullet punched through the side of the boat, and water began to pour in. "Keep rowing!" Cyrus shouted. "We're almost there!" We reached the Ohio shore with the boat half full of water, scrambling onto the bank just as it sank behind us. On the Kentucky side, we could see the slave catchers mounting their horses, preparing to ride to the nearest bridge to cross after us. But we were in Ohio now. We were in free territory, and the station master on the Ohio side, a burly German man named Schmidt, was waiting with a wagon to take us to the next safe house. "Schnell! Quickly!" he shouted, and we piled into the wagon. He covered us with hay and drove at breakneck speed away from the river, taking back roads and shortcuts that only a local would know. By the time the slave catchers crossed the river and reached the area where we had landed, we were long gone, hidden in Schmidt's barn 10 miles away. We had made it to free territory, but we were not yet safe. The journey to Canada was still long, and the slave catchers did not respect state boundaries. We would have to remain vigilant for another month as we made our way north through Ohio. But something had changed. The fugitives were no longer just running away from slavery, they were running toward something. Toward freedom, toward new lives, toward the possibility of being fully human for the first time. And I was no longer just a fugitive myself. I was a conductor, a leader, a man who had helped bring 18 people out of bondage. I was becoming what Cyrus was, a hunter of freedom, a man who would return again and again to the South until everyone who wanted to be free had the chance to escape. The climax of our journey came in late May as we approached the Canadian border. We had been traveling for nearly 2 months, moving from station to station through Ohio, into Michigan, and finally to Detroit, the last American city before Canada. The station in Detroit was run by a black minister named Reverend Cross, who had himself escaped slavery 20 years earlier. He gathered us in his church and spoke words that I would remember for the rest of my life. "You have walked through the valley of the shadow of death," he said, his voice ringing through the small building. "You have faced dogs and guns and men who wanted to drag you back into bondage, but you have persevered. You have kept faith, and now you stand on the threshold of true freedom. Tomorrow you will cross into Canada, and you will be free not just in fact, but in law. No slave catcher can touch you there. No master can claim you. You will be your own people, able to build your own lives, to raise your own children in freedom." He paused, looking at each of us in turn. "But remember this, freedom is not just about escaping slavery. It's about building something new, something better. It's about proving that we are fully human, fully capable, fully deserving of all the rights and dignities that have been denied us. You carry the hopes of millions still in bondage. Live well, live free, and never forget where you came from." The next morning, we crossed the Detroit River into Windsor, Canada. It was a short boat ride, maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing from one world into another. When we stepped onto Canadian soil, several of the fugitives fell to their knees and wept. Others laughed with joy. Sarah threw her arms around me and kissed me, and I kissed her back, tasting salt from her tears and feeling my own tears streaming down my face. We had made it, all 18 of us. We were free. Cyrus stood apart from the celebration, his face thoughtful. I walked over to him. "We did it," I said. "We brought them home." "We did," he agreed. "But there are thousands more still in bondage. Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Our work is not done, Eli, it's only beginning." "I know," I said. "When do we go back?" He looked at me with something like pride. "Soon. But first, you need to rest. You need to build a life here, establish yourself, become part of the community. You can't be a conductor if you have no home to return to, no resources to draw on. Take a year, learn what it means to be free. And then, if you still want to do this work, we'll go back together." "I'll want to," I said with certainty. "This is what I'm meant to do." Cyrus smiled. "I know. I knew it from the moment I first met you, when you were just a scared boy helping me rescue Ruth. You were born for this, Eli. You're going to be a great conductor, maybe even greater than me." "I learned from the best," I said. We stood together on the Canadian shore, looking back across the river toward the United States, toward the South, toward the plantations where millions still suffered in bondage. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would return. Not to flee, but to hunt. To hunt for the enslaved and bring them home. To hunt for freedom and never stop until it was won. The legend of Cyrus would continue. But now there would be a new name whispered in the slave quarters, a new figure moving through the darkness, bringing hope and liberation. My name was Eli, and I was a hunter of freedom. I spent my first year in Canada learning what it meant to be free. It was harder than I expected. Freedom, I discovered, was not just the absence of chains, it was the presence of choice, And choice required knowledge and skills I had never been allowed to develop. I had to learn to read and write, to manage money, to navigate a society that, while not enslaved, was still deeply prejudiced against black people. I had to learn to make decisions for myself, to plan for a future that extended beyond the next day's survival. Windsor, Canada West, was home to a large community of formerly enslaved people, and they welcomed us with open arms. The refugees from Drummond's plantation scattered to various towns and cities, building new lives. Sarah and her mother Hannah settled in Windsor, and Sarah and I began courting properly with her mother's blessing. Joseph found work as a blacksmith, his forge skills valuable in a growing town. Others found work as laborers, domestics, farmers, whatever they could do to earn an honest living. Cyrus had a small house on the outskirts of Windsor, where he lived with Ruth and their 2 young children, a boy and a girl born in freedom. He worked as a carpenter, a trade he had learned during his first year in Canada, and he was respected in the community as a man who had not only escaped slavery but had returned multiple times to bring others out. But I knew he was restless. I could see it in the way he would stare south across the river, in the way he would fall silent during conversations, lost in thoughts he did not share. He was planning his next trip, his next rescue, his next hunt. In the spring of 1858, a year after we had crossed into Canada, Cyrus came to me. "It's time," he said simply. I knew what he meant. "Where are we going?" "Back to Tennessee, back to Drummond's. There are still people there who want to come north, and I promised I would return for them." "When do we leave?" 2 weeks. I need to coordinate with the stations along the route, make sure everything is in place. This time we're going to be even more careful. No betrayals, no surprises. We're going to bring out another group, maybe 15 people, and we're going to do it perfectly. I spent those 2 weeks preparing. I said goodbye to Sarah, promising her I would return. She was frightened for me, but she understood. She had been one of the people Cyrus and I had brought north, and she knew the importance of the work. "Come back to me," she said as I prepared to leave. "I can't lose you now that I've finally found you." "I'll come back," I promised. "I always will." Cyrus and I traveled south with 2 other conductors, following the same route we had used the previous year, but in reverse. It took us 6 weeks to reach Tennessee, moving carefully, gathering intelligence about Drummond's plantation along the way. What we learned was encouraging. Drummond had become increasingly paranoid and erratic after losing 18 slaves in one night. He had fired Pritchard and hired a new overseer, but the new man was less brutal and more interested in maintaining productivity than in terrorizing the slaves. Security had actually decreased slightly, as Drummond could no longer afford the expensive patrols and guard dogs he had employed the previous year. More importantly, the legend of Cyrus had grown even larger. The slaves on Drummond's plantation spoke of him as if he were a mythical figure, a spirit who could pass through walls and become invisible. They believed he would return, and they were ready. We infiltrated the plantation on a moonless night in June, moving with the confidence of experience. This time there was no betrayal, no alarm, no chaos. We moved through the quarters like ghosts, gathering our group, 15 people who had been carefully selected and prepared. They were waiting for us, ready to go, with small bundles of possessions and hope burning in their eyes. We led them out of the plantation and into the forest, moving quickly but quietly. By dawn, we were 15 miles away, hidden in the first safe house. By the time Drummond discovered they were missing, we were already crossing into Kentucky. The journey north was smoother than the previous year. We knew the route, knew the stations, knew how to avoid the most dangerous areas. We moved efficiently, losing no one, arriving in Canada 7 weeks after leaving Tennessee. 15 more people free. 15 more victories against the system that had tried to destroy us. And I had done it. Not as Cyrus's assistant, but as his equal, his partner. I had led half the group, made crucial decisions, kept people safe and moving forward. I had become what he had trained me to be, a conductor, a hunter of freedom. Over the next 7 years, Cyrus and I made 11 more trips south. We brought out groups ranging from 5 to 20 people, rescuing a total of 147 individuals from slavery. We developed a reputation throughout the South. Cyrus, the legendary conductor who kept returning. and Eli, his protege, who was becoming a legend in his own right. But the work took its toll. In 1861, the Civil War began, and the South became even more dangerous for conductors. Slave catchers were more numerous and more brutal, and the penalties for helping slaves escape were more severe. Several of our fellow conductors were caught and killed. Safe houses were raided and destroyed. The Underground Railroad continued to operate, but it became increasingly difficult and dangerous. In 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in rebel states to be free. It was a symbolic victory more than a practical one. The proclamation only applied to areas the Union did not control, but it changed the nature of our work. We were no longer just fugitives and conductors. We were part of a larger movement to end slavery entirely. Cyrus and I joined the Union Army, serving as scouts and guides, using our knowledge of the South to help the military campaign. We led raids to liberate plantations, guided escaped slaves to Union lines, and provided intelligence about Confederate movements. In 1864, we returned to Drummond's plantation one final time, not as fugitives but as soldiers. The Union Army had pushed into Tennessee, and we were part of a unit liberating plantations in the region. When we arrived at Drummond's, we found it largely abandoned. Drummond himself had fled, taking his family and whatever valuables he could carry. The remaining slaves, about 30 people, were still there, uncertain what to do with their sudden freedom. I stood in the center of the quarters where I had been born, where I had spent the first 13 years of my life in bondage, and I read the Emancipation Proclamation aloud to the assembled people. Some of them remembered me, the boy who had struck Pritchard and run away. Others knew me only by reputation. Eli, the conductor who had helped so many escape. "You are free," I told them. "Not because I freed you, not because Cyrus freed you, but because you were always free. Slavery was a lie, a crime, an abomination. It tried to make you believe you were less than human, but it was wrong. You are free, you have always been free, and now the law finally recognizes what has always been true." After the war ended in 1865, I returned to Canada and married Sarah. We built a life together, raising 3 children and becoming active in the community of formerly enslaved people. I worked as a teacher, educating children who had been born in freedom and adults who had been denied education under slavery. But I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot the people who had not made it, the ones who had died in bondage, the ones who had been caught and returned and punished for daring to seek freedom. I told their stories to anyone who would listen, making sure their suffering and their courage would not be forgotten. Cyrus continued his work after the war, helping newly freed people adjust to freedom, advocating for their rights, fighting against the discrimination and violence that continued even after slavery was legally abolished. He became a prominent figure in the abolitionist movement, speaking at conferences and writing articles about his experiences. We remained close friends until his death in 1889. He was 74 years old, and he died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. At his funeral, more than 300 people attended. People he had rescued, their children and grandchildren, fellow conductors, abolitionists, and community leaders. Speaker after speaker rose to tell stories of Cyrus's courage, his dedication, his refusal to rest while others remained in bondage. I spoke last, and I told the story of how Cyrus had found me in the forest after I fled Drummond's plantation, how he had trained me, how he had transformed me from a frightened boy into a man who could fight for freedom. I told how he had returned again and again to the South, not to flee but to hunt for the enslaved and bring them home. "Cyrus taught me that freedom is not a destination," I said. "It's a journey, a struggle, a commitment that never ends. He taught me that we are not truly free until everyone is free, that we cannot rest while others suffer, that the fight for justice requires everything we have and more. He was the greatest man I ever knew, and I am honored to have been his student, his partner, and his friend. I lived until 1912, long enough to see my grandchildren grow up in a world that, while still deeply flawed and unjust, was better than the one I had been born into. I saw the end of slavery, the passage of constitutional amendments guaranteeing rights to black people, the slow and painful progress toward equality, but I also saw the rise of Jim Crow laws, the terrorism of the Ku Klux Klan, the continued oppression of black people through different means. The fight was not over. It would never be over. Not in my lifetime. Perhaps not in any lifetime. But it was a fight worth having, a struggle worth continuing. On my deathbed, surrounded by my children and grandchildren, I thought about that night when I was 12 years old and I first heard the name Cyrus whispered like a prayer. I thought about the journey that had brought me from slavery to freedom, from victim to fighter, from boy to man to elder. And I thought about all the people, hundreds of them, who had made it north because Cyrus and I and others like us had refused to accept that slavery was permanent, that oppression was inevitable, that the powerful would always win. We had proven them wrong. We had shown that the powerless could fight back, that the enslaved could free themselves, that courage and determination and solidarity could overcome even the most brutal system of oppression. My last words were for my youngest grandson, a boy of 12 who reminded me of myself at that age. Never stop fighting, I told him. Never accept injustice. Never believe that you are powerless. You come from a line of freedom fighters, of hunters who refused to be hunted, of people who broke their own chains and then returned to break the chains of others. That is your legacy. That is your inheritance. Use it well. I closed my eyes for the last time with a smile on my face, knowing that the work would continue, that the fight would go on, that the hunt for freedom would never end until justice was finally achieved. I had been born a slave, but I died a free man, and I had spent my life making sure others could do the same. That was enough. That was everything. This was the story of Eli, born into slavery on the Drummond plantation in Tennessee around 1843. He escaped at age 13 and became one of the most successful conductors on the Underground Railroad, personally helping to free more than 200 people over a span of 20 years. After the Civil War, he settled in Windsor, Canada, where he worked as a teacher and community leader. He married Sarah, a woman he had helped rescue, and they raised 3 children together. Eli lived until 1912, long enough to see the end of slavery, but also the rise of new forms of oppression. He was buried in Windsor's Sandwich Street Cemetery, and his grave became a site of remembrance for those who honored the legacy of the Underground Railroad. His story, along with that of his mentor Cyrus, inspired generations of freedom fighters and civil rights activists who continued the struggle for equality long after both men were gone. The echoes of Eli and Cyrus reverberate through time, a powerful reminder that true freedom requires not just escaping oppression, but returning to liberate others. Their story shows us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear stop you from doing what is right. If these untold stories of defiance, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to justice resonate with you, join our community. Subscribe to Slave Revenge to uncover more hidden truths from the shadows of slavery. Your support helps keep these powerful narratives alive. Leave a comment sharing what moved you most about Eli's transformation from enslaved boy to legendary conductor.